Ask anyone when the Roman Empire fell, and most people will give you the same answer. They will tell you that it collapsed long ago, that the mighty legions vanished, and that the ancient world faded slowly into darkness. But almost everyone is wrong, because when the city of Rome fell, the Roman Empire did not die with it. Far to the east, on the shores where Europe meets Asia, a single shining city carried the flame of Rome for another 1,000 years. Its emperors still wore the imperial purple. Its people still called themselves Romans. And behind walls that no army on earth could break, they built one of the richest, most dazzling, and most forgotten empires in all of human history. This is the story of that empire. This is the story of Byzantium. To understand how Rome survived, we have to go back to a single, fateful decision. By the early 300s, the Roman Empire had grown far too vast to rule from one city alone. It stretched from the rain-soaked hills of Britain all the way to the burning deserts of Egypt. Enemies pressed in from every side, and the empire was buckling under its own enormous weight. And so a soldier turned emperor named Constantine made a choice that would echo across the centuries. He would build a brand new capital. He chose a small Greek town called Byzantium, perched on a narrow strip of land between two continents, guarding the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. It was a fortress made by nature itself, surrounded by water on three sides and almost impossible to attack. In the year 330, Constantine dedicated his new city. He called it the New Rome, but the world would come to know it by another name. They called it Constantinople, the city of Constantine. It was breathtaking. Wide avenues lined with statues gathered from across the empire, towering stone walls, glittering golden churches, and a great arena where tens of thousands of people roared as chariots thundered around the track. Then came the storm. Wave after wave of invaders crashed against the borders of the empire. And in the west, the old heart of Rome could not hold. In the year 476, the western half of the empire collapsed for good. But the east survived. Why did it survive? Constantinople was richer. Its walls were far stronger, and its position was almost untouchable. While the west shattered into a patchwork of small kingdoms, the east endured. It remained Roman in its laws, Greek in its language, and Christian in its very soul. In fact, the people of this empire never once called themselves Byzantines. That name was invented by historians many centuries later. They simply called themselves Romans. To them, Rome had never fallen at all. In the year 527, a new emperor took the throne. He was a man burning with a single grand vision. He dreamed of restoring Rome to its ancient glory. His name was Justinian, and beside him stood one of the most remarkable women in all of history, the Empress Theodora. Once a poor actress from the streets of the city, she rose to become the most powerful woman in the world and Justinian's most trusted advisor. Together, they would push the empire to its absolute peak, but it nearly ended before it had truly begun. In the year 532, a furious riot exploded inside the great arena. The mob turned against the emperor. The city burned. As the crowd screamed for his downfall, Justinian prepared to flee for his life. It was Theodora who stopped him. She refused to run. It was better to die an emperor, she told him, than to live as a fugitive. Her courage held the throne. The revolt was crushed. And from the ashes of the burned city, Justinian built something that would last forever. He built the Hagia Sophia, the great church of holy wisdom. When it was finished, it was the largest building on the entire planet. Its enormous dome seemed to hang down from heaven itself, floating on a ring of golden light. Walking inside, people felt as though they had left the earthly world far behind. Legend says that when Justinian first stepped through its doors and gazed up at what he had created, he whispered, "Solomon, I have surpassed you." But Justinian's greatest gift to the world was not made of stone. He ordered his finest scholars to gather 1,000 years of tangled, contradictory Roman law and to forge it all into a single, clear, and ordered system. The result, known today as the Code of Justinian, became the foundation of legal systems across Europe and far beyond. To this very day, the laws of much of the modern world still flow from the work of this one emperor. For a brief and shining moment, his armies even reconquered Italy, North Africa, and parts of Spain. The Mediterranean Sea became, once again, a Roman lake, but the cost was crushing. The endless wars drained the treasury dry. And then came a plague, a horror that swept across the empire and killed millions upon millions of people. The dream of a fully restored Rome slowly slipped away. Justinian had reached the very summit. After him, the empire would have to learn a far harder lesson. Not how to conquer, but how to survive. In the centuries that followed, the empire faced deadly enemies on every front, and one threat would test it like no other. In the 7th century, a powerful new force swept out of the deserts of Arabia, conquering vast territories with astonishing speed. Within a few short decades, the empire had lost Egypt, lost Syria, and lost the Holy Land itself. The advancing armies pushed all the way to the gates of Constantinople. Twice, enormous fleets and armies laid siege to the great city. Twice, the very survival of the empire hung by the thinnest of threads. And twice the city was saved, in part by one of the most terrifying secret weapons in all of history. They called it Greek fire. It was a liquid flame sprayed from tubes mounted on the front of warships. It clung to everything it touched. It burned even on the surface of the water itself. Entire enemy fleets were turned into floating infernos before they could land a single soldier on the shore. The exact recipe was such a closely guarded secret of the state that even now, no one knows for certain how it was made. Behind their towering land walls, and behind their wall of fire, the people of Constantinople held the line. And in doing so, they shielded the rest of Europe from invasion for hundreds of years. But the greatest threat to the empire did not always come from the outside. For more than 100 years, the empire tore itself apart over a single, burning question. Was it right to create images of the holy, sacred pictures of Christ and the saints? Or was it a terrible sin? Emperors ordered the holy images to be destroyed. Monks and ordinary people fought desperately to protect them. Riots broke out in the streets. Blood was spilled in the name of faith. This bitter struggle divided the empire for generations before the sacred images were finally restored. Because in Byzantium, religion was not merely a part of life, it was life itself. The empire saw itself as the chosen kingdom of God on earth, and its capital as a holy city. And out of this very struggle was forged the great tradition of Orthodox Christianity, a faith that would one day spread across Eastern Europe and Russia, and that is still followed by hundreds of millions of people today. By the 10th century, the empire had not merely survived, it had risen once more. This was a second golden age. Constantinople had become the richest and most dazzling city in the entire Christian world. Its markets overflowed with silk, with spices, and with gold. Diplomats and traders arrived from across the known world, and many wrote home in stunned disbelief at its wealth and its splendor. Visitors from the rough, simple towns of Western Europe could scarcely believe that a city like this could even exist. And this golden age produced great warrior emperors. The most fearsome of them all was Basil II. Under his iron rule, the empire smashed its rivals and pushed its borders back to their widest point in centuries. he earned a chilling nickname that history has never forgotten. They called him the Bulgar Slayer. When Basil died in the year 1025, the empire stood proud and powerful once more. It seemed truly unstoppable, but it was not. The first great blow came in the year 1071 at a place called Manzikert. A fierce new enemy, the Seljuk Turks, destroyed a Byzantine army and captured the emperor himself. In the chaos that followed, the empire lost much of Asia Minor, the very heartland that had fed its people and filled its armies for centuries. The empire would never fully recover. But the deepest wound of all did not come from a foreign enemy. It came from those who called themselves friends. In the year 1204, an army of Western Crusaders, soldiers who had set out to fight a holy war in distant lands, turned instead upon the greatest Christian city on earth. They stormed Constantinople. They sacked it without mercy. For 3 long days, they looted, they burned, and they destroyed. Priceless treasures gathered over 900 years were smashed apart or stolen away. Ancient works of art that had survived since the days of antiquity were melted down for their gold. The greatest city in all of Christendom was torn to pieces by fellow Christians. It was a betrayal that the empire would never forget and never truly survive. For nearly 60 years, foreign rulers occupied the fallen city. And although the Romans eventually fought their way back and reclaimed their beloved capital, in the year 1261, the empire they restored was only a shadow of what it had once been. The wealth was gone. The lands were gone. The great age of glory was over. The final 2 centuries of Byzantium tell a story of slow and dignified decline. The empire that had once ruled across 3 continents now shrank, year by year, to little more than the city of Constantinople and a few scattered lands. Its emperors, once the most powerful men on earth, were reduced to begging the kings of Europe for help that almost never came. Inside the great walls, the city itself felt strangely hollow and empty. So much had been lost that open fields and gardens now grew within the ancient boundaries. Travelers described a capital of haunting, fading beauty, a place living quietly in the long shadow of its own glorious past. And as Byzantium slowly faded, a powerful new force was rising all around it. The Ottoman Turks, a young and hungry empire growing stronger with every single year. One by one, they swallowed up the last Byzantine territories until the great city of Constantinople stood almost completely alone. It was the last island of the old Roman world, surrounded on every side. Everyone could see what was coming. It was no longer a question of whether the empire would fall. It was only a question of when. In the spring of the year 1453, the end finally came. The Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II, just 21 years old, brilliant and utterly relentless, brought his vast armies to the walls of Constantinople. He was determined to capture the city that had defied conquerors for over 1,000 years. Inside those ancient walls stood the last Roman emperor, Constantine XI. By a strange twist of fate, the empire had begun with a man named Constantine, and now it would end with one. The odds were impossible. The emperor could gather only a few thousand defenders to hold walls that had been built for an army 10 times that size, but they would not surrender. When he was offered his life in exchange for the city, Constantine refused. He would defend his capital to the very end. For 1,000 years, the walls of Constantinople had been the greatest fortifications in the world. No army had ever broken through them. But Mehmed had brought something that no previous attacker had ever possessed. He had brought a monster, a gigantic cannon, the largest that had ever been built, capable of hurling stone balls that weighed more than half a ton. Day after day, it pounded the ancient walls, doing what no army in all of history had ever managed to do. And slowly, the unbreakable walls began to crack. In the early hours of the 29th of May, In the year 1453, the final assault began. Wave after wave crashed against the broken walls. The defenders fought with desperate courage all through the night, holding back attack after attack after attack. But there were simply too few of them, and far too many of the enemy. And then, at last, a breach. The Ottoman soldiers poured into the city. As his capital fell into ruin around him, the last emperor of the Romans did not flee. He did not beg for his life. He tore off the imperial robes that marked him as the emperor. He drew his sword, and he charged into the fighting as an ordinary soldier, to die alongside his beloved city. His body was never found. By the morning, it was over. After more than 1,100 years, the Roman Empire, the Empire of Constantine, the Empire of Justinian, an unbroken line of emperors stretching all the way back to the ancient world, was finally gone. An entire age of human history had come to an end. And yet, Byzantium never truly disappeared. Its influence still flows through our world today, in ways that most people never even realize. For 1,000 years, while much of Europe forgot, the scholars of Byzantium carefully copied and preserved the great works of the ancient Greeks and Romans, the philosophy, the science, the literature. And when these scholars finally fled to the West, after the fall of the city, they carried all of this precious knowledge with them. And that knowledge helped to ignite one of the greatest awakenings in all of human history, the Renaissance. The laws of Justinian still echo in the legal codes of nations all around the globe. The Orthodox Christian faith, born and shaped within Byzantium, is still followed by hundreds of millions of people to this very day. And far to the north, the rising power of Russia would one day claim the legacy of the fallen empire, calling its own capital the Third Rome, the true heir to a tradition that had begun on the shores of the Bosphorus. And even now, the great cathedral, Hagia Sophia, still stands, having watched over the city for almost 1,500 years. The empire that we call Byzantium was, in truth, the longest-lasting Roman state in all of history. For over 1,000 years, it stood as a bridge between the ancient world and our own, guarding, preserving, and passing down the precious flame of civilization. It was an empire that the world very nearly forgot, but its story deserves to be remembered.